Welcome back to Waking Up with Mindful Serenity Yoga. And we're going to continue answering, or not answering, but pulling a concept from the jar and attempting to speak on it for 4 minutes. And this is done impromptu without any practice or without any knowledge of what I'm going to speak about. Therefore, it will be imperfect. Perfectly imperfect is the way I see it, because I want you to see beyond the imperfections of this thing that I call me and how it performs to what is being said, if that is at all possible. Anyway, I digress. I'm going to reach into the jar now, and I'm going to pull out a concept. Before you even look at it, I'm going to take a deep breath for anchoring purposes. And then I will read it, and it is Redeemer Ego. Redeemer Ego. What is the Redeemer Ego? The Redeemer Ego is actually some term that I came up with many years ago. I was writing a book, I did actually write the book, but whether or not it gets published, I don't know. It probably never will, but anyway. And it was called Beyond Fear and Shame, There is Love. And while I was writing that book, I had this realization that there was two egos as part of the human being, and those two egos were like two sides of the same coin. On one side of the egoic coin, we have shamer ego, which is probably something many of us are familiar with, whether we are consciously aware of it or not. But shamer ego basically is that great sense of unworthiness, that sense of not belonging, that sense of having to pay rent here for being on this planet for some reason, that many of us have within us. Usually a result of some conditioning, some trauma possibly, but regardless, many of us have a shamer ego on one side of our coin. We have this sense of unworthiness. On the other side of the coin, in order to redeem us from this shame, the egoic, which is always self-preserving and self-protective. In fact, Dr. Sue Morter in her book, Energy Codes, refers to it as the protective personality. In its protective modes, it doesn't want us dwelling in shame, because shame stops us from particularly doing most things in our life. This Redeemer ego, this creation of the Redeemer ego, will try to redeem us, just like you're redeemed from sin if you're a sinner in Christian theology. You're also redeemed from shame in the psychic world, or when I say psychic, I mean as in psyche world, when the psyche, in order to cope, wants to redeem itself from the shame that it is experiencing. So it tells us that we can redeem ourselves. We can be more than. If we are in shame, we are wallowing and cringing in a state of not being enough. And we are often seen by society as not being enough, because that energy is oftenly transmuted into our actions. So Redeemer ego will say, okay, we're going to make you better in the eyes of society. In order to be better, because ego is so comparative and so competitive, we have to usually be better than other people. So it says, okay, if you're more educated, if you are more successful, if you have more money then, or if you have more problems then, if you're more of a victim then. So it can go either way of that coin. But in other words, it wants you to be more than other egos around it, so that it can redeem itself from the sense of shame. You have to be best at something or really good at something in order to redeem yourself from the shame. So what are you really good at? It may take your talents and say, okay, we have to be successful in this. Or it may say, okay, you have to create a persona being very confident and successful, and that's the way you're going to operate. And the more you stay in Redeemer mode, the more you believe that is who you are. But at the same time, shame is always, always there, talking to you from the bottom of the barrel, whispering to you, reminding you that you're not enough. So often when we're in the midst of a shame cycle and someone says, oh, I really don't like the way you did that, shamer, which is always in us, will start crying out and say, see, you can't save us. And you're pulled right back down into the spirals of shame, feeling unworthy all over again, feeling like you're not enough. Your mistake, which may be something as simple as mistakenly calling somebody the wrong name, suddenly becomes a sin again, because shamer's operating. Shame is very conditioned to see itself as a sinner, every mistake as a sin sort of thing, especially if you grew up as a Catholic like I did. So you're automatically sinful and remorseful and wallowing in your shame again. And it's a very dark cycle to be down there. And you may not even consciously aware that you're down there because it happens so fast. You'll just suddenly be feeling, whoa, I don't feel good. And before you know it, Redeemer steps in again, because these two, Shamer and Redeemer, as far as I'm concerned, are like battling egos. They both want to win. And Redeemer will come up and say, no, we're going to do this. And so you find yourself on this journey trying to do more, on this mission to do more and be more. And it's exhausting because you can never do enough to stay away from shame. And shame keeps pulling you back down, but you can't really shut Redeemer up either, especially when redemption becomes a habit for you. A success. You're always out there on a mission to show the world that you're more than what you actually feel you are. And that becomes a very big habit in our lives as well. Neither one, Shamer or Redeemer, are healthy egos. But society would say that the Redeemer is much more healthier than Shamer. But when you get into the spiritual understanding of things, you realize that neither are healthy. They're both ego, just different sides of ego. And it's best to be without both of them. So how do you stop them from battling each other? You have to dig right down, unfortunately. It's, the best way through pain is through, not around or over. You have to dig your way through to the shame, the original shame. Have a good look at it, experience it, and then let it go. And that can be a process that requires maybe professional help for some of us. It may require this, but like in my process, I have been doing this for decades. I'm getting there for sure, but it's kind of a shock to realize that shame is still in your system, and it will be for a while until we actually deal with it. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that made a little bit of sense. Redeem your ego is not something we want to build. Thank you for joining me. Namaste.